before you can plan towards it. You enter into transactions, you buy land with your friends or with people, and then you use certain terms that have consequences that we take for granted. And so you may have come across the term joint owner. Joint owner means that at the time of the acquisition, the persons whose name appear as the owner, they have what lawyers call indivisible interest in the property. Now, this is a very small word, but has very huge legal implications. So don't just use it for the sake of it, because it does not mean what it means in English, the joint ownership. What a joint ownership means is that when one owner dies, the property goes solely to the other person. So when you're entering into business transactions to acquire properties, and you say, oh, we are joint owners, don't put that on paper. The moment you do that, the first person who dies loses any right to that property. Are you with me? So what you can do is what lawyers call tenants in common. So the tenants in common suggests that there's a right of survivorship. And so if you acquire land with your group of friends and you are tenants in common, tenants used not in the context of landlord-tenants, but a legal term. You are tenants in common instead of joint owners. What it means is that if one partner dies, his children or his estate can benefit from his share or his portion of that property. And so the joint ownership term that we bundle across has significant legal consequences. So we must be careful how we choose to use it. And so I'm talking about what assets you can plan towards or you can leave behind. And I said family property is not for you. So don't plan with it. But property that is yours, either solely or as tenants in common with other persons, then you can plan with it. The third kind of ownership that I'll speak to is matrimonial property. Now, our Constitution states that there's a presumption that a property acquired in the course of a marriage belongs to the two. In fact, with our new Lands Act, which was passed in 2020, even if it is only the husband's name or the wife's name that is on the property, the other spouse cannot sell it or assign interest without the consent of the other person. However, the law also acknowledges that it is possible for couples or spouses to independently own property even in the course of marriage, as long as the intention is clear. And so you may be with your husband or your wife, and you may agree that as for this property, it is for only me, so I can deal with it as I want. And the wife can also decide that as for this property, it is only mine, I can deal with it as I want. In the absence of that clear intention, the presumption is that it is acquired jointly. There need not be evidence of, okay, somebody paid 5 cedis, another person paid 10 cedis, to prove that there was contribution to acquire. It is a presumption. So as long as the property was purchased whilst you were married, even if it was purchased with the resources of only one person, it is presumed that it is jointly acquired for both parties until a contrary intention is proved. And so you can deal or plan towards property that is in your name alone, or property that you are tenants in common with other persons, or even matrimonial property. Because with matrimonial property, you have an interest in it, and so you can plan towards it. Please, are we okay up to this stage? Okay. Then the next thing that I would want to discuss is what happens if you die testate or intestate. Now, when you die and at the time of your death, you have left behind a valid will. The court will distribute your estate in accordance with that will. And I said a valid will. A valid will because it is not every document that purports to be a will that is a valid will. because there's a law that governs how to draft or execute a valid will. And a lot of people take it for granted. But when you pass and it is raised, and objections are raised to the validity of the will, it means that whatever your intentions were will not be respected by the courts and the people that you left behind. So I will briefly mention the essential validity or the requirements of a will. Now, I'll chip in this. Now, the practice now is that no will be accepted by the court unless it is drafted by a lawyer. So they found job for lawyers. So whether you like it or not, despite all the information I'm giving you, you still would have to go to a lawyer to have your will legally executed. So I'll just run through the basic requirements of a valid will. One, the valid will must name who the beneficiaries are. And so in your will, you must state who you would want to have what and when. Now, a valid will must also name who your executors are. Executors are persons that you would trust that upon your demise, they are going to carry out the instructions in your will. There is no minimum number of executors per law, but the practice is that they are normally two. The reason being that if it is only one person and the person dies before you, then you are in trouble. So normally, it is advised that you have two executors, but the law does not state that you must have two. And not more than two, because then it makes it easy for decision making and for things to be done. So your will, you must name executors. Now you must also be able to append either your signature or your thumbprint, or even if there's a mark on it to indicate that you confirm that what you state there on the face of the document was actually your last wishes. And so you could write it yourself, or you could go to a lawyer to have the lawyer write it for you. Now, the last requirement of the will is that there must be two witnesses. Two. And the two witnesses must be present at the same time. And so you cannot prepare your will and take it to Kofi for Kofi to witness, and then later you go and take it to Yao for Yao to witness. When you have your will prepared, either by you in your office or the lawyer's office, the two witnesses must be present at the same time. If any of these requirements is not satisfied, the court may, and I'm using the may advisedly, refuse to enforce your last wishes. And so everything that you have written on paper may not be enforced by the court. Of course, you must be able to demonstrate that at the time you made the will, you were of sound mind, and you were not under any form of duress, and you were not under any form of undue influence. That is why in a will, a beneficiary cannot be a witness. This is one important thing that a lot of people take for granted. So when you prepare your will and you intend to give something to your son or your daughter, that son or daughter cannot be a witness. Because the presumption is that if the person saw you prepare the will and the person was present, the person may have decided or dictated to you what you should put or what the person can inherit. I had this experience in practice where I think the people from La or Nungwa, if you have a child with a woman, all of them must carry the same name. I don't know if you can relate. So all your first daughters, for instance, must have the same name. I think it's from La or Nungwa. And so we had the will of a very rich man, and the name of the witness was the same name as the beneficiary. But they were actually first daughters from different wives. And so there was a huge fight as to the validity of the will, because the same name appeared as both a beneficiary and a witness. And because of that, the will was set aside. Not the will. What that beneficiary was supposed to get was set aside. It was later that I found out that it is actually like a name given to your first daughters by your wife. But that is a very, very important requirement. the validity of the will. If your will is deemed valid, the court will respect your wishes. And that is why it is important that in your lifetime, you are able to put together a will. Now, any person above the age of 18 can prepare a will. A will can cover the assets you have now and the assets you hope to have. So you don't need to wait to say, I don't have anything, and so I don't need to have a will. You can prepare a will now to cover assets you have or assets you anticipate to have. Now, when you have a will, you don't need to have only one will in your lifetime. You can have as many wills as you live, as long as reference is made to the other wills. So if today, maybe you have 2 houses, and then you prepare a will distributing them, and then 3 years later, you acquire 2 additional houses, you can prepare what is called a codicil, which is like an addition or an amendment to the original will. Or you can even prepare a new will altogether and revoke the old one. And so do not think that every person is entitled to only one will in his lifetime. You can prepare as many wills as you want. And like I said, it may cover properties you have now or properties that you intend or you hope that you are going to have, as long as they are your properties. If there is a valid will, your estate will be distributed in accordance with the will. Now, what happens if you do not leave a will? If you do not leave a will, your estate will be distributed by government. Government will decide how to distribute your estate. By that, what I mean is that there is a law referred to as PNDC Law 111, the Interstate Succession Law, that governs how persons or the estates or the properties of persons who died without leaving a will should be distributed. And so if you do not take your destiny or the destiny of the generations after you into your own hands by preparing a will, then you are leaving that to government. And there's a formula. It has a lot of mathematics. 3/16, 9/16, 1/8, 1/8. If there's A, there's B. There are formulas there. You do not want to leave those things to chance. I always advise clients, it is better you decide who would have what than not. Now, one thing that I must also state, that whether you like it or not, there are persons in your life that you must leave reasonable provision of your estate for. And so you would see, or sometimes you watch in movies, that a very rich man said his young son has disrespected him in his lifetime, so in his will he will not give him anything. Those things do not work in law. Because the law requires that if there was somebody who was dependent on you, to your knowledge, at the time of your death, you are expected to leave a reasonable provision for that person. That is the law. And so even if in your will, you do not leave anything for that person can apply to the court. So for example, you were paying the person's school fees, and then because you had a fight with the person, when I say paying, not like a benefactor, but somebody that you had an obligation towards. So it could be a child, or sometimes even a spouse. And then because you had a fight with the person, when you died, you said, I will not give you anything. Some, even in movies, they say that they refer to some Bible verses that say, if you dishonor your parents, you get nothing. In law, that such a person, as long as the person is able to demonstrate that he was relying on you and you had a legal obligation or a natural obligation towards that person, may apply to the court for the court to make reasonable provision. So these are some of the reasons why you must arrange your affairs. Otherwise, you leave a lot to chance. And contrary to what people think, preparation of wills is not costly at all. It is not costly at all. It's not costly in respect of time, and it's not costly in respect of processing it to make it valid. And so, like I said, even though it's not particularly stated in the law, the practice is that if you have a will prepared, it must be confirmed by a lawyer. And so the lawyer must put his stamp on the document to confirm that he prepared the will. You must add a copy of your ID, passport picture, and then you go and file it at the registry of the court. So there are normally 3 copies. The registry of the court will have 1 copy. The lawyer who prepared it would have 1 copy. And then you would also have 1 copy, or as many copies that you request, so that you may give to the executors or the beneficiaries. And then when you pass upon your demise, they would write to the registrar to say that this person left behind a will, he has passed. The registrar will now invite the persons that would be asked to be present for the registrar to read out the contents of the will in the court. So it's a very serious business. If that is done, that is when the court will now begin to allow the executors to distribute the estate. This was adopted because of the several litigation that arose in respect of estate. So the state decided to intervene to make sure that as much as possible, there is avoidance of doubt as to whether this was the last wishes of the person. So it's a very serious business now with the courts, and we must take it as such. And so you have the option of either doing the will or letting the state distribute your estate for you in accordance with those formulas that I have discussed. In fact, there is the Office of the Administrator General, which has shared the same premises as the Registrar of Companies, that if you die and they can't find any member of your family, then the state will take over your estate and begin to deal with it. And so if you don't want all of those things happening, all the up and downs, and then there's no certainty as to what you intend to do with your estate, what comes after you, it is your own interest that you prepare a will. There is the traditional way of preparing wills, which is recognized by the court, but it's very fluid. Fluid in the sense that it's very difficult to prove. I'm sure a lot of you may have heard the term summon seal. That they call it the deathbed, the bed death wishes. So if somebody at the time or in anticipation of death, that is the condition. Maybe the person is very sick and the person knows that he or she is coming to pass, make certain declarations and distributions of his estate in the presence of as many persons as possible. Those wishes may be respected by the court. So maybe you didn't have enough time to put down your will, but you were told that you are coming to pass, and maybe there's no lawyer around, or you don't have that opportunity, or you are illiterate. You can invite a lot of people around, and then you can tell them, when I die, this should happen, that should happen, that should happen. And when you die and they all agree, that is where the dispute comes in, because somebody may definitely not be happy. So there's definitely bound to be disputes. But assuming they all agree, then they can go to the court and say, these were his last wishes. So it is like an oral will. But like I said, it's very dangerous. Because once it's not written, somebody may say, I didn't hear it like that. That is not what I heard. And so we will not allow it to happen. Then you would have to revert to the PNDC law 111 and distribute it in that light. Now, there's also an interesting aspect of the will, where you have a will at the time you were married, and you leave an estate to your spouse at the time of the marriage. Once there is divorce, that part automatically extinguishes. So Kofi was married to Amma in 1999. Kofi makes a will in 2001, and then says that I give to my wife, Amma, or even didn't mention Amma's name, but just said I give to my wife my house in Trasaco. And then they divorce in 2005. Then Kofi dies in 2010. Amma cannot come and say that in the will there was reference to wife. And so even though we divorced, I'm entitled to that property. So that provision is also valid. That once there is a divorce, any provision in a will that makes reference to a spouse at that time is automatically extinguished. Please, are we okay at this stage? Okay. Then there is the right of, I will call it survivorship, just for us to understand what it means. If a beneficiary in a will predeceases a testator, so in the will, a mother leaves a property to her daughter, but her daughter dies before the mother. What it means is that if the daughter has children, those children would benefit from that will. So where the reference is made to a beneficiary who predeceases the testator, and that beneficiary has surviving children, those children would take the place. So whatever should have gone to their mother who died will now pass to them. And so again, I'm just bringing out these things for you to understand the advantages of making sure that you have a will in place. Because these provisions do not apply to the PNDC Law 111, where there will be distribution in that respect. Now, I would briefly also speak about trust. It was very dear to Pastor's heart. So I would want to talk about it. Trust. You can create a trust in your will, or you can create a trust in another instrument. Now, what do we mean by a trust? A trust is you put together an instrument which will deny you legal ownership of your property, but vest the interest in the property to other persons. Now, sorry, I know I'm speaking legalese, but I'll break it down. Just give me a minute. A will, for example, will take effect only when you die. Once you are alive, the beneficiaries cannot come and say that I heard in your will you gave me this, and so I'm coming to take it now, like the prodigal son. No. A will only take effect after your death. But with a trust, you can create it now. And so if you have acquired 3 properties in your personal name, but you think that the nature of your business is very volatile, and you have opened yourself, or you may open yourself up to a lot of risk, you may decide to create a trust in your lifetime. What a trust means is that you would register, and it's not a difficult thing to do. You would register an instrument. You get a lawyer or somebody who is vested to prepare what is called a deed of trust. Now, in the deed of trust, you would say that I'm the owner of this property, but I'm transferring all legal interest in this property to another person that you call a trustee. Now, the risk in that is that you must trust the trustee. No pun intended. Because you are putting essentially your life in the hands of another person. And there are a lot of businessmen, sorry, this is life, I forgot. There are a lot of businesses or businessmen who have ring-fenced their wealth in the form of trust. And so you see them living in homes or driving cars or sitting in offices. When the business goes bankrupt, they are still okay. Because they were enjoying the benefits of the work, but they had minimized the legal exposures if it goes down the drain. It is completely legal. There's nothing illegal about it. In fact, in some foreign jurisdictions, there are some law firms that only operate as trustees. So they have registered companies that operate as trustees. So if you're a businessman with business interest, you come to them, you discuss the nature of your businesses. So let me give you an example. Most of the time, if you go to a bank for a loan for your business, they will require personal guarantee from a director. Right? So even though you are taking the money and putting it in your business, you are not spending the money. The bank is requiring that you, as the shareholder or the managing director, you provide a personal guarantee. Now, what it means is that if the business goes bad, maybe it wasn't like you mishandled the money. You imported rice. There was problems on the sea. At the time the rice arrived, it had gone very bad. You sold, you lost money. The banks will tell you they do not care. Your business is bankrupt, but because you gave a personal guarantee and you have a house, personally in your name, they will come after the house and sell it. And so to avoid some of these things, a lot of businesses or business owners create the trust. So even though you see them living in their houses, it's not for them legally. But like I said, the risk is that you must trust the trustee. And so there are three certainties in creating trust. There must be certainty of your intention to create the trust. So you must, in the document, either in a will, I'll discuss how the trust works in wills. In a document, either in a will or a separate instrument referred to as the deed of trust, state clearly that you intend to create the trust and that these are the trustees. Again, normally, it is not in your interest to have only one trustee. It's better to have two, maybe. Two is appropriate. Worst case scenario, 3. Now, in the deed of trust, you may state out the powers of the trustees and who the beneficiaries are. So you can create the trust in an instrument called a trust deed or in a will. But like I said, the trust deed will take effect now. The will will only take effect when you are dead. But the intentions are the same or the requirements are the same. So in your trust deed, you may say that I'm transferring ownership of all these properties to these persons as trustees. That the properties should be held for the benefit of my children or my wife or my church. What it means is that those trustees would only hold what lawyers call legal interest, but it is not to their benefit. So the trustees cannot go and sell the property because they are only holding it for the benefit of persons that you have named in the deed of trust. And so the document must be well prepared. That will limit the powers of the trustees. Sometimes you may even say that, okay, for what you do, every year we will give you 5 cedis or 10 cedis or whatever benefits they would be. So you may physically be in possession of those assets and enjoying it, but it's not in your name. So that at any point in time, if you become personally liable for anything, your assets cannot be attached and sold. And so having a deed of trust it's a very important tool in very developed or amongst, should I say, sophisticated businessmen. In the line of our practice, we have helped a lot of them create these deed of trust. And so you will hear that today there's a very popular person who is running for president in some country. Every 5 years he declares bankruptcy. But you know he's never poor. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Every 5 years, you go to New York, you see his buildings. You go to Dubai, you see his buildings. But every 5 years, he declares bankruptcy. But he's never poor. Because there's a trust that is managing his estate. Or his affairs, let me put it that way. So you see him driving the cars or living in the homes, but it's not for him. It's for benefit of other persons that he has named there. And if it's for your own children, you know your children normally will not deny you from the benefit of what they know is for you. But there must be certainty that you intend to create the trust by that instrument. There must be certainty what properties you are putting in that trust. So you must name them. And just like the will, the deed of trust or the instrument of trust can be updated. And so you can always go and amend them and update them as you acquire more properties. Or even, normally, there's also the option of you even stating how the trustees can even be removed or reappointed. And so it gives you a lot of freedom to determine how your affairs will be managed, even in your lifetime, with that deed of trust. And it's not, like I said, sometimes people get scared that, it's a very difficult thing, it's very complicated, lawyers will charge you huge. But if you look at the value of what is providing you, you will not think of the cost. Like I said, it's a tool that a lot of businessmen that are in those spaces, they use because they look at the value of what is providing you. And so the deed of trust is also a very, very important instrument. Like I said, you can also put it in your will. So there are some families that when in the will, the executors who are named as in the will are also designated as trustees. So they are called executors and trustees. And they state, for example, in the will that you would open a bank account. Maybe I have 5 properties. Don't sell them. All the rents from those from those properties should be put in that bank account and should be used to pay the fees of my children. That way, the executors will forever be in charge of making sure that the properties do not end up in the hands of your children who end up selling them. We did one for a family where the man was so rich, he said every single grandchild would have $100,000. Without limit. As soon as the child comes to say this is, and they prove that it is, in Ghana, a Ghanaian. Oh yeah, it's not a Ghanaian. You'd have $100,000. So the man has passed, but the executors of his will the man has passed, but because he created the trust in his will, none of his children is in possession of those properties. So the trustees are now managing the estate and making sure that all his grandchildren are in schools in America. Because he didn't want to have the situation where his children would become the owners and then decide to dissipate the estate. So he says, it's not for anybody. I am creating a trust. These are my trustees. And in the will, we set out how the trustees can be changed, under what circumstances. So that forever, and their fees, because they will not also do it. It can be a full-time job depending on the nature of the estate. So the man died some years ago, but it's been made sure that his children are in physical possession of his properties, but none of them can dissipate it. Because they know they can't touch it. The legal interest remains in the trustees. So all that you do is that if you have a child, you go, it's proven, the school, everything is paid. And it's a very good, helpful instrument. Because we have situations where, I remember Pastor has been talking sometimes that a lot of times in Africa, he studies the generation. Businesses do not go beyond third generation. If you go to Dubai, there are companies that do trust planning. It's a huge business. So if you have a business portfolio, they come to you, they study your children's behavior, everything, then it is a huge business. Then they are able to tell you, we think that if you name these persons as trustees, it will help you. If you put these persons out of your businesses as in they will not be directors, they will not be this, but every month you will give them this, they will give them this. So there is succession of your businesses. Otherwise, you would pass and then you realize that your children will automatically walk into the companies thinking that our father did it, so we can also do it. And by the second or third generation, all the wealth has dissipated. And so it is in your own interest to have these instruments whilst you are alive. Because your interest in your business will be measured by your share. So if it's a limited liability company, which every serious businessman, your business must grow from sole proprietorship to limited liability company. That will be measured in shares. You can have a trust instrument where your shares will automatically not go to certain persons. So that when you pass, the trust or the trustees will now assume control and ownership of the business to manage it for generations to come. Some, even in their deed of trust, do not name individuals. They name offices. So, for example, they can say that at all points in time, the resident pastor of ICGC Open Heavens should be a trustee. At all points in time, the president of the Ghana Bar Association should appoint a trustee. So you see that you are naming persons that you think will have the competence, who are not even family members, so that there will not be fights and interests that are more emotional than rational. And so you have an opportunity to appoint persons with caliber or competence to ensure the continuity of your inheritance. And so if you think that your nature of business is towing along that line, or you are expecting 1,000 times more breakthroughs, then you should be thinking along preserving them. Otherwise, it may end with you, and you would have yourself to blame. Please, I hope I have been useful so far. Okay.
So we are going to take questions, and I think the mics are ready. But I want to ask Lawyer Bobby, so now if I deal with your chambers, and is it the document is in your chamber, so it does not matter the fact that maybe you are not around, but everything is still there.
Yes.
So that it's like it rolls over in your chambers.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to find out.
Yes. So it's not that when you prepare the documents, it's the law firm with a lawyer acting on it, and so by the ethics of our profession, those documents are kept more or less forever.
Okay. The other question I want to ask that when you have a trust, how do you deal with your vehicles that you use?
You can, if the trust can cover both movables and immovables.
Okay.
And so, like I said, you would be in possession of them, enjoying the physical possession, but you don't have the legal ownership. So you can list that I'm putting all my vehicles in this deed trust. It doesn't mean that the trustees would now be driving them. You'll be driving them. You'll be bearing the cost of everything. But it also means that when there's trouble against you, the vehicles cannot be taken and sold to pay your debt. So it does not deny, creating a trust does not deny you the benefits of those properties. You can continue to remain in possession of them, but you will not have legal interest in them.
All right. So let's take the questions now, quickly. If you're ready to ask a question, please come and stand behind the
Thank you,
the
sir,
mic.
for the presentation. I've gained some legal knowledge. So my question is that in a marriage, you mentioned that those in the marriage can independently acquire property. So far as that intention is clear, I want to know if that intention must be written or once it has been discussed, that is enough. Thank you.
Okay, so most of the time, in those circumstances, it's very difficult to have it written. Because at that time, you can't go and say that, let's write it down. It's as if you know something is going to happen. But the intention could be demonstrated by exclusive use of those properties. So I have advised a very wealthy man before who asked that question because he said he acquired a property and he decided to put it in the name of the wife. And after he did that, the wife started saying, I want to sell it, I want to sell it. I'm like, no, but it is for us. He said, but it is in my name. So I said, he asked me, does it mean that the fact that he put it in the wife's, he bought it, put it in the wife's name, means that it is only for the wife? I said, not only that, it depends on how you have used it. So for instance, if you developed it and you were going there together, hiring the contractors, supervising, it's an indication that you thought or you assumed or you expected that you were part owner, even though it is in the name of another person. But if I buy a land and I tell you that, I have bought a land in my village, and you never come there, I'm the one who always go there, I'm the one who builds, you never showed any interest, you never did anything. Then you come and tell me, you are also building one in your village. I also don't come there, I'm also not interested. Then from our actions, it is clear that you intended the one in your village to be for you and the one in my village to also be for me. I don't know if this example would suffice, especially when you have a couple outside the country. the man and the woman. The man saves and says that I'm building for my mother in the village. You two save and go and build for your mother in her village. That's the typical example I can give. Yes.
All right, Bobby, thanks for enlightening us. My question is, inheritance distribution, I understand is very key, very, very important. But how does one also manage debt in conjunction with your assets?
If you die leaving behind your debt.
Yes.
Okay. It's good, but I was only talking about the positive, so it's good he's brought that. So there is a law called the Administration of Estate Act. The Administration of Estate Act places an obligation on your administrators. Administrators, if you die without leaving a will, or your executors, if you die leaving a will, that before they start distributing the estate, they must pay all your just debt. So if you died leaving $1 million in your account, and you have 5 children, but you owe $200,000, and it's when a just debt, as in there's evidence of it, the executors must pay the $200,000 before they can distribute the estate. So the law provides for that one as well. Yes, Professor.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you very much, lawyer, for the presentation. I have 2 questions. First of all, how often can one update either an individual will or a spousal will? How often can you update it? Looking at the processes.
You have introduced the new term, spousal will. By that, you mean the man and the woman will do a will together?
Yes.
I never advise that. Do your will. Let her do her will.
Okay. So how often, be it as it may, how often can it be updated?
As many times as you want. As long as you make... So the presumption is that the last will is the final will. However, you need not necessarily reinvent the wheel and completely draft a new will every time. So you have one will, maybe at that time you had 4 properties. So you distributed it. 3 years later, you've acquired additional 3 properties. You can have what we call a codicil to distribute only those additional properties. But if you want to amend the old will, you can still amend it in your codicil. So you can say that in my will dated 1st May 2024, I gave my house in Trasako to Kofi Menu. Now I am giving that house to Yamansa. So you can update it as many times as you want. There's no limit as long as it's very clear that you are either completely revoking the old one or you are amending it.
And the updated one is kept with the same legal person and not a different legal person.
It is in your own interest to have all of it with one person.
Okay.
But because the issue of coordination, if lawyer A thought that this is your only will, and lawyer B also thinks that that is the only will, there may be conflict. So it is, or if you are, in my practice, sometimes if the person comes to say, draft a will, we ask, have you drafted a will before? Then he says yes. We ask for a copy. That is why you must always get a copy for yourself. And we ask him, are you completely revoking the old one? If he says yes, we let him write a letter to the registry of the court to withdraw the old one and then replace it with the new one. So that if the other lawyer writes to the registrar that, oh, this is the will, the registrar says, no, the man in his lifetime withdrew that one.
Fantastic. Okay, the next question. When the witnesses of the will or the deed of trust die before the person who the intestate,
there's no problem. As for the witnesses, if they die before the testator, there's no problem. It's the beneficiaries.
Okay.
That is where there's legal consequences. But for the witnesses, all that is required is that they must be present
to sign
together. If they die the next day, the will is still valid.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So at a point you open an account and then you use a next of kin, let's say your sister, your mother, or your father. And then at the point of making a will, you use your children. Mm-hmm. So when you die, the accounts, you have next of kin. they would require that a letter of administration is brought for the next of kin to be able to access funds. Now, in your will, you have your children there. Who does the money in the account go to?
Okay. It's okay. It's a good question because the bankers are always confused. They hear those words, letters of administration, next of kin, and they won't ask for legal interpretation. They always say, oh, no, go and bring. A next of kin is not a beneficiary. It is only with SNIT, Social Security, that by law, when you are registering with SNIT, you must indicate who your SNIT benefit should go to. And in that law, they loosely describe those people as next of kin. But legally, a next of kin is not a beneficiary. A next of kin is the person you may contact in my absence. That's what it means. So if you go and open a bank account and they ask you a next of kin, it means that if you are not there, who should we contact? It doesn't mean the money in the account belongs to that person that you mentioned as the next of kin. Now, if you have money in your account, somebody or a deceased has money in his account, if he died intestate, and you said they'll go for letters of administration, it means the person didn't leave a will. So the administrators, let me mention this, in the PNDC law, there are 4 persons who qualify to be administrators if you don't leave a will. Surviving spouse, surviving child or children, surviving parent, and customary successor. 4 categories of persons: surviving spouse, or spouses, surviving child or children, surviving parents or parents, and a customary successor. So any of them acting together, but no more than 4, can apply to be issued with the letters of administration if you didn't leave a will. But if you left a will, then you will name the executors. So your executor need not be your spouse or need not be your child. It could be a trusted friend. Or it could even be, I know a very prominent man, he died in the Methodist Church. His executor, he said at all points in time, the presiding bishop of the Methodist Church should be the executor. And he has lots of properties, and the Methodist Church is fighting to take the properties for him. It's good because in the will, that was what he wanted. So if that man had money in his account, it is the persons named in the will as the executors, when they obtain the probate from the court, who can apply to access the account and then distribute it according to the law. If he died without a will, then any of those 4 categories of persons acting together can apply for the letters of administration, access the money, and distribute it in accordance with PNDC Law 111.
Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to find out what happens to your assets when the trustee gets into trouble. Maybe the trustee also goes bankrupt.
It doesn't affect those assets because the trustee, like I said, is only a legal owner on behalf of other persons.
Okay.
So he doesn't personally, or his liabilities are not attached to those assets. So it's a win-win either way. If the trustee goes bankrupt, those assets are not for him. He's only holding it in trust for other persons.
Okay. All right.
Okay, sir.
Please. Thank you. And please, with everything that you've taught us, it's so comprehensive. I'm pleading if you can put it in a document that can be shared on a platform so that personally I want to go through again. Thank you.
Sorry, sir. The podcast is there, so you can listen to appoint it.
Okay. Please, my first question is, who can apply to the registrar?
For what?
For the will.
To be read.
Yes, who can apply to the
So
registrar?
normally when the person dies, it is advised that the lawyers write to the registrar. The reason being that when the lawyers go to deposit the will, they are given certain numbers, reference numbers. So in the letter, they will write the reference numbers. And then the registrar will know, because there may be so many people with the same name. So you can't simply write to the registrar and say, Kofi Menu is dead. Did he leave a will here? But the lawyers who deposited it, they will be giving reference numbers. So the lawyers can make reference to it. Or if you are an executor or a beneficiary and you have access to those details, you may also write to the registrar. But what I know is that most registrars would now try and confirm from the lawyers whether they are aware this person is dead and this person has written, even though it's informal, but they would normally do that.
Okay. That being said, that means the beneficiary should also know the lawyer, because they will communicate that this person is no more so.
What I do when I draft wills is that I always tell the testator, I want to have exchange telephone numbers with at least one executor and one beneficiary. Let them know that you have handed this to us. Let me also know them, so that in case there is anything, would be able to. I learned that because when I started practice, I did a will for a man. I never met any of the beneficiaries or the executors. One day I was driving in Osu and I saw his obituary. So I walked to the house to ask how I will contact. They said they don't know me, they can't give me the information. And I didn't know how to go there and go and tell them the man. I prepared a will for the man. So since that day, because they may not know, and they may just think he didn't leave a will. But he had some properties in Ungwa Estate. So since then, I always say, let me talk to one beneficiary and one executor. I will not share the contents with them, but I'll just let them know that we have received these instructions, and when this man dies, you may contact us to assist you.
Okay. And please, can an executor double as a witness?
Yes. An executor can be a witness. It is only a beneficiary that cannot be a witness.
Okay. And
the way you've come with pen and paper. Oh, no, don't worry, you can ask a question.
And
I was just kidding.
You use the term estates. I want to inquire if it's the same as assets.
Yes, estates in the context of assets and liabilities. So your estate is not only your assets, it's your assets and your liabilities when you die.
Okay. And then with the trust, so you've made the trust. So what happens if the trustee dies?
The deed of trust or the instrument of trust will provide for means of, like I said, revoking the trustee or replacing or changing. So if the trustee dies and there is no such provision, the beneficiaries may apply to the court for the court to appoint a trustee, or if they are of age, they may agree amongst themselves who a trustee should be, or if the person who owns the asset and creating the trust is called a settler. If the settler, the person who owns the asset and creates the trust, is called a settler. So if the settler is alive, he may reconstitute the trust.
Okay. And then the last one. You made a comment that the trust has to trust the trustee. So does that mean that the trustee can take over the property?
Legally, the trustee cannot assume ownership. Like I said, he only has a legal interest for the benefit of other persons. So he can fight to protect it, but he cannot assume ownership. If he attempts to assume ownership, either the settlor or the beneficiaries can sue him and say that we only gave it to you, like they say, Shesomame. It's not for you. So you cannot dissipate it. That's why your deed of trust must be very sacrosanct. The rights, the duties, the obligations, the liabilities of the trustees must be well set out. We even put a limit on the expenses they can incur. We did one where the object of the trust was a hotel. So we said you cannot spend more than a certain amount of money in a month for so-called maintenance without the approval of the beneficiaries, so that they will not use that as a means of also siphoning funds. So the deed of trust must also be well set out.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Counsel. I wanted to find out, you said concerning a director or a shareholder of a company, you have a trust, you are entrusted, the company goes for a facility or huge loan and doesn't work out. they will be coming for your asset, but you have a trust. It is that you are exonerated or you can be safe. They cannot come after your asset.
If you put your assets in a trust, then they are no longer yours for the purposes of your exposures.
Okay. I was going to ask that, what about if the banks put in a caveat in the contract that it can affect even if your asset is in trust? Is it possible
It will not be enforced.
They cannot enforce that.
Even if they put it there, it will not be enforced. Because once there's a deed of trust, you are denied every legal ownership. Unless you personally, despite the deed of trust, goes to give to the bank that I'm giving it to you. The bank cannot say that it even affects what. No. Otherwise, then the trust concept will lose its legal effect.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, sir. Any other questions?
In line with your presentation, you said that a couple cannot sell a property without the consent of the other couple.
Now, there's a law passed in 2020 called the Land Act.
Okay.
If a couple acquire property after 2020, and it's even in the name of one of the spouses, that spouse cannot sell it or transfer or mortgage without the consent of the other spouse.
Okay, so my question is, if you're also doing a will,
yes,
do you have the consent of the spouse before you can do your will?
No, when you are doing your will, you are only dealing with your interests. So it is not as if you don't have any interest in the property. So assuming you acquire property in the name of you and your wife, and you do a will, in the will you say, all my interest in the property are acquired with my wife should be given to this person. Okay. So if your interest is found to be 50%, it is that 50% that you are disposing of in your will. You cannot in your will dispose of the entire property that is not for only you.
Okay, so in a sense, your wife should be aware.
Aware is, should I say, politically correct, but not necessarily consent. Because she may disagree with you who you want to give the assets to. So consent is a strong word. That is why I was telling Prof that I don't agree with joint spousal wills, because it's very complicated. It's very complicated.
Somebody give a big hand clap unto the Lord.
Thank you very much.
And I'm very happy for the exposition he has given us this evening. And the major thing I've been pushing, like he said, was about the trust. And we should all learn, as soon as you have 1, 2, 3 properties, begin to push all those things off your name, all your vehicles off your name. And it's very important so that you can distinguish yourself. Like he said, it's something that I've been very passionate about. So I want us to follow whatever, and I want us to live a life. The Bible said a good man leave inheritance for his children. We want to make sure that everything is done well. And please, don't go and disturb him. Go and look for your lawyer. All right, let's rise and let's share the grace. Offering, it's okay. Okay, so next week we have the mental. Okay, so next week don't meet the next week. Dr. Amma Edwin on mental health. So no prophetic power night on Friday. Sunday we'll have to bring our first fruits and communion. Okay, let's share the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and forever. God bless you. Let's see you. Bless you.
From side to side now. Yeah. Waving from side to side now. If I had 1,000 tongues, if I had 1,000,000 words to say, I would give it all right now. You deserve it all. If I had 1,000 tongues, if I had 1,000,000 words to say, I would give it all right now. You deserve it all. Here we go. Hey, I will bless your name with everything that's within me. I will give you praise forever. Oh, I will bless your name with everything that's within me. I will give you praise forever. Minister Tomato.
If I had to cross the sea,
Oh yeah.
if I had to dance like David danced, I would do it all right
I
now.
will do it all right
You
now.
deserve it all.
You deserve it all.
If I had to cross the sea,
Oh yeah.
if I had to dance like David danced,